pleasure to speak at CEP again, and it's a special pleasure to, come after this really interesting, preparing the ground, both from Hans and also from Ambassador Fitton-Brown. So I can dive right into my perspective, which will be, as Hans mentioned, a perspective on both the potential of foreign fighters traveling to Afghanistan, what we have learned from those that have traveled to join jihadist organizations in Syria and Iraq, and especially the perspective of those that have returned or potentially return mostly to Western European countries in the near future. So I think it's still interesting to start with, asking the question: is there really a good moment to travel to Afghanistan as a foreign fighter right now? Ambassador Fitton-Brown has already mentioned several very important factors, so I will try to make this really quickly. But I think it's still interesting to mention that, of course, Afghanistan has been historically a very attractive destination for foreign fighters. It has a long tradition, so it's not like a new destination or something that people would still have to get their head around. As the UN monitoring team, coordinated by Ambassador Fitton-Brown, has mentioned in the report in June 2021, is that there are still around 10,000 foreign fighters still present in Afghanistan. So this is quite significant still, mostly from Central Asia, the North Caucasus region in Russian Federation, Pakistan, and also a region of China, mostly Taliban. But also for other groups. And as he mentioned already, it's estimated that ISK members are around 2,000 currently. So this is the picture, I think, interesting or important to keep in mind. And then again, he mentioned this already, is that I also do think that this Taliban victory, the takeover, the now presentation as a government, as a state, is really perceived as a morale boost. It was really also perceived as a moral victory. And that's interestingly also as a perception that yes, violence can work very well. So the perception that demanding for political change non-violently, such as, for example, Muslim Brotherhood has done, might not be the best way. So it has given a boost to this perception of yes, we can throw out Western powers and we can really build a state. And also the focus of jihad on the local level, so liberating and focusing on a state as opposed to targeting the whole international and global and jihadi community all over the world, might not be the best way, as some observers have pointed out. Also, I would say that slightly, in the chatter, ISK has been perceived as more welcoming to potential foreign fighters. Allegedly, Taliban has sent a message that they were not ready to support cross-border movements. Again, Ambassador Fitton-Brown has pointed out that they are in different place right now. They are currently interested in also having a better international reputation, establishing themselves as also as a partner in some sorts. So now having a large number of foreign fighters pouring into the country might not be in their best interest, whereas ISK is obviously in a different position. Also, the recent attack that has been mentioned in the Kabul airport, of course, gave ISK huge visibility. So this was really something very important for them, that they succeeded with this gruesome attack. But from this perspective, of course, as mentioned already, it really helps raise their stake. For example, also attracting and recruiting disenfranchised Taliban that are not happy with the Taliban's approach, not radical enough, for example. And also there has been, for example, reports of Southeast Asian government officials saying that all the chatter that they intercept is really 100% about how do we get to Afghanistan. So there's really, as mentioned already, there's really a movement, there's really an interest in how do we get there, how can we do this. But also here, I would point out that the focus seems to be on ISK again as the potential destination. But I would also, I would also say that it's very early, and I think yes, many would observe first before deciding which kind of faction to actually integrate. And then, of course, I think that there is another factor to take into consideration, that there is also a kind of frustration with the situation in Syria and Iraq. There has been at least the military defeat of the whole IS caliphate. So this is also that plays into the push factor that might push foreign fighters from this region into another region, and in this context, Afghanistan. And also, I think important to point out that the root causes that motivate foreign fighters all around the world to consider leaving the countries and joining jihadist group in other countries are still there. These kind of situations have not changed. On the contrary, you might even point out that there has been more crackdown, more international CET cooperation, more persecution, and maybe even more stigmatization and discrimination towards Muslim communities because of the whole IS reports of their violence, for example. So I think this is important to keep in mind. And then if you look at who would be potential foreign fighter groups, and I think it's interesting to maybe name three. Again, we have heard that the ISK has reportedly said that they're looking for educated individuals, they're looking for highly experienced foreign fighters, so they don't seem to target the larger community, but look to really strengthen their force in a quality over quantity matter. So I think first group would be those foreign fighters already in Syria and Iraq that are now interested in relocation. For example, a foreign jihadi leader in Syria has said that many of our brothers will go to Afghanistan, which has become a safe haven now. So they feel oppressed, for example, by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So one option would be, okay, let's leave this behind and let's start something else in Afghanistan. Another group that might be a potential foreign fighter group are those that are geographically close. Again, this has been mentioned already. So, for example, Central Asia, but also China. And also Tanya Mera from ICCT has mentioned that there's a real threat of an exodus of hardened fighters from Kyrgyzstan, from Tajikistan, that are also more likely to go to Afghanistan. And then finally, we also have existing networks in other countries. So, for example, Australian government has said that they know of some individuals that have allegedly supported ISK in the past, and that some of them have expressed the intention to also travel to Afghanistan to join them. And second example is also Germany. Actually, you see this in the picture. As was a police raid on a community center in Germany, and currently there are several individuals from Tajikistan who have been living in Germany, and they are now prosecuted for planning an attack, planning assassination, terrorism financing, and they have been in contact with high-ranking IS officials in Afghanistan and in Syria. So I think it's really important to watch what kind of connections exist also between groups in Afghanistan and potential German networks, for example. And then next up, I think it's also worth looking back into the foreign fighters that had traveled to Syria and Iraq, which is now almost a decade, let's say. And I think we have really come a long way. First of all, when the Islamic State was rising, of course, there was more of attraction of male foreign fighters joining them. But as they proceeded into really a state-building organization of different needs, also for different roles of people, they attracted also women and even welcomed minors. So Joanna Cook and Gina Vale, previously at ICSR, estimated that all foreign IS affiliates are 50,000 people. Of those women, 7,000 people, 7,000, excuse me, and minus 6,000. Of course, some of them have deceased already, so it's an estimate, but it just gives you the impression that when this started, we were not prepared for this kind of group of people and of diverse people traveling to an Islamic State and to join this kind of jihadist movement. So I think that now, hopefully, we will not again underestimate these kind of movements and also the extent of roles, but also the extent of numbers that might be attracted to this kind of endeavor. Then another issue was that we know that some of the foreign fighters were not known to security services. So of course, it's incredibly difficult to prevent travel of, let's say, a German national who is traveling to Poland and then to Hungary, and then ends up in Waziristan in Pakistan, or of a German national traveling to Turkey and then crossing over to Syria, if he might be going to vacation. So this is really a challenge that we at the time I think underestimated these kind of travel movements, but that now we have a much better understanding how people travel, where are networks, where are important points of contact and so on. So also I think this is we're a step ahead now. And then also interesting is that at a time it was more difficult to actually bring them to prosecution or press charges. So for example, meanwhile, having foreign fighters also from Europe, but also from other countries traveling, we now have different on a national and international level laws that, for example, criminalize the traveling to a certain territory. The stay in a certain territory, for example, it can also be prosecuted, as well as, for example, perceiving joining a non-state armed group can be perceived the same as joining a different army of another country. So, for example, now Germany has a law that can strip citizenship of foreign fighters that might travel to a non-state armed group, whereas in retrospect, this cannot be applied to foreign fighters that have gone to Syria and Iraq. So again, we have a different legal situation, if you so will, because we have learned from these mistakes that at that time we were not prepared in a legal perspective. And also, I think at the time, there were some voices saying, well, it's great that they're gone, go ahead, you do your jihad somewhere else. It's good that these people are no longer in our territory. Whereas now I think we have a much better understanding that the person that might join a jihadist group abroad might come back, might be sent back. There might be social issues, a family member who's sick or so on that brings the person back. So even if somebody has decided to leave everything behind, that doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that it will never come back. So really observing different movements back and forth, I think this is also something that we have learned from this whole foreign fighter issue traveling to Syria and Iraq. And then quickly on the challenges that we now first facing with returning foreign fighters, or those that already returned, might return in the future. Of course, also Ambassador Fitton-Brown has mentioned this. There are really different national approaches to repatriation of those that are now in the northeastern Syria and camps, or also detained. Most are very reluctant to repatriation. And some have, actively removed citizenship, like the UK or also Australia. But now there are more and more countries that happily, I would say, or luckily, are more, more willing to repatriate at least minors. So there are a number of countries like also Germany, Finland, but also Italy, Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, and so on, that have sometimes reluctantly, but have repatriated some of the minors from the camps. And in some cases, even the mothers, despite the risk, but perceiving the females in their role as a mother and not as a separate entity, which is also problematic, but this is another question. And interestingly, countries like Kazakhstan, for example, has repatriated 700 people, which is, I think, unprecedented, 520 children, the rest mostly women, but also 25 men, but has refrained from really prosecuting the women, which is also, again, problematic, but more to it. And I think, again, this has been mentioned, the longer that we leave people in these camps, the more they will also adopt a discourse of victimization. They will perceive themselves as the sole victims, and they will perceive both the Kurdish administration, but also the West as the enemies. And any kind of hope that there was that they might be, be disillusioned of IS, that they might, disengage, for example, or even de-radicalize, this chance is shrinking by the hour. And again, also because now Save the Children has put out a report that 60 kids have died just this year in the camps. So again, we're losing time, and I really think this was a great way to frame it. It's a threat multiplier, the current situation and the reluctance of Western governments mostly to repatriate the citizens, as Ambassador Fitton-Brown has put it. And then still we really have difficulty prosecuting women. This is not only due to a lack of evidence, because women traditionally had different roles with the Islamic State. They appeared less often in propaganda videos, for example. If they appeared, they were veiled, of course, and also because in some cases courts are having still, or also security agency in that matter, have a biased gender assumption, saying that women have been passive, they have been victims, they are not really responsible, and for example, we cannot really separate them from their children because they will suffer. And I think this is really something still problematic, how we see women not only in the role of mother of children with the Islamic State, but also in their own capacity and in their own decision making. And for example, Germany, I would say, has been quite successful in at least using, for example, international law to still prosecute for looting, for crimes against humanity, but still prosecuting for genocide is still something that we need to really work on more, because this is a crucial issue, I think, and the Yazidi community in that sense also needs to see that justice done. Practitioners have reported they are also fearing failed compliance. So returnees pretending they're disengaged, pretending they're de-radicalized, but not at all. Especially women that will, try to show compliance for fear of having their children removed. So I think this is also an issue for risk assessment. And finally, all the other difficulties that come along with reintegration into society, mental health issues. Many of them are really severely traumatized, and also the social stigma of being a returnee. Of having been with IS in many countries is still a huge problem. So finally, I would like to point out three things. So first, I have touched a bit about this, but I want to stress that we know much more about the different profiles of foreign fighters. Why would they join a jihadist terrorization organization? How would they travel? What are their roles while they're with these organizations? But also, what kind of human resource policy jihadist organizations can adopt that make jihadists also join another group because they feel that they don't, have the right role, they could be doing better, and what they hoped to achieve with this group, they're not getting. So also the hopping between different factions, as we have seen in Syria and Iraq. And also we know that simple life events like having a baby can really change also a person and present this kind of window of opportunity and create a cognitive opening where people say, well, this is what I'm doing with my life. I'm not sure I want to do this. And then this kind of opening can also be a motivation to go back and retreat from the group. But still, it's really difficult to say. I would also be very cautious in, making any estimates because we also have less access to social media, which was very useful in analyzing Islamic State. And we have obviously a lack of intelligence if our embassies in Afghanistan are still closed, and it's much more difficult to really get a understanding of what's going on the ground. The second point, again, do not underestimate the role of women. Some aspects I already mentioned, and what I would also like to stress is that, for example, there are reports that those women that come back from, for example, to Central Asian countries are now involved in fundraising. They're very active. They're supporting brothers in other countries. So they're becoming really, really important elements of the whole networks. And for example, in Germany, we know that as many of them, of the male foreign fighters are in jails. The gender roles are changing. So for example, before an online chat, for example, was strictly only for men. Now they're opening up to women. So there's a really change of women being possibly more important. And I think it's really worth to watch this kind of development, not necessarily in the traveling, but in the fundraising, the recruiting, and the propaganda part, and the facilitating, networking part, and so on, because this can be really something that we could underestimate. And finally, we know from analysis on foreign fighters is that the social environment, so parents, friends, teachers, and so on, are so important in all the aspects, because they can really be, spotting radicalization factors. They can be detecting plans to travel. In many, many cases, there has been some kind of illusion that, I say goodbye because I will be traveling. So there's now much more sensibilization of what, are the factors that might, say this person might be traveling very soon, and why and where. But also we know that many times people are still in contact with some of their friends or some of the family members while abroad, and that if they come back, the social environment is really one of the most stabilizing factors that we really should use in any kind of rehabilitation and reintegration efforts. They can be destabilizing, of course, if they contributed to the radicalization, but I think they can be really used in a constructive method to at least reintegrate once the person is back. Okay, this is from my side. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any question you might have.